Hello, my name is Elisa Gray. I'm the author of the book What Maketh the Witch, which was released on October the 1st by Green Magic Publishing. And tonight I want to talk to you about a subject that I find very interesting, and that's the subject of the witch trials and gendercide. Scholars have been debating for years really as to what actually happened and what sparked off the witch trials. Was this sort of death, disease, war, people looking for a scapegoat? Was it a way to call women? What was going on? So tonight I'm going to try and sort of look at that and unpick some of the things that happened during the witch trials. Prior to 1200 BC, when the Bible was written, magic was a part of everyday life. This is something that had started as a divine practice, very male-dominated divine practice in the temples in Persia and Mesopotamia, and then sort of come out of the temples into the everyday life of the public. In ancient Egypt, there was the god Heka, who was the god of magic and medicine, and there were no temples to Heka, because simply by being alive you were worshipping him. Sort of this magical life that he'd given you, he walked with you through it, through death, the afterlife, etc. Very, very, sort of platted in. Magic was platted into everyday life with in ancient Egypt. In Greece, businessmen often carried a curse tablet to protect their business. Would use the kolossoi, the little Greek poppets with the nails in the eyes and the hands tied behind the back. These were to protect the boundary of property, confuse a prospective burglar, etc. In Rome there were magic shops, so much like when we go to Glastonbury in the UK and lots of witchcraft shops. Rome, yes, there were the magic shops. You could go and buy a spell, a love spell, a curse, a magical object, etc. And this was magic. This was accepted magic. Black magic. There was definitely a distinction between black magic and white magic. These aren't racist, racial terms. These are simply terms to explain dark, black, evil, negative magic, white, positive, healing magic. And black magic came with a death sentence. If you were proven to be using black magic against somebody, you could be executed. But white magic was everything else. A curse, as we think of a curse, somebody's going to curse somebody really bad. Back in the day, it was something simple like getting a dog to bite somebody, or stub their toe. It was very innocuous, nothing horrible. This was just part and parcel of magic to protect you, the magic user. And healing, herbs, all that sort of thing. In the UK, obviously, we have the cunning women, the old lady up the road who would cure you, etc. Magic and medicine were very linked. When the Bible came out, all magic was bad magic. There was no distinction anymore between black and white magic. Magic was all linked with the devil. Even Jesus Christ had to defend himself against accusations of witchcraft, because he brought somebody back from the dead, which is necromancy. But he had said, look, my power's not from the devil, it comes from God, and had to defend himself quite, strongly against those accusations. So obviously the Bible comes out, all magic is bad, don't use it, don't do it, don't divine, don't, heal, don't do anything. And what really sort of kicked off, I suppose, the starts of persecution for witches was the Spanish Inquisition. And that began as the persecution of non-Catholic religions, full stop. So anybody who wasn't a Catholic could find themselves accused of heresy. And it was mainly centred around the Jews, the conversos, Jews who'd converted to Christianity, who weren't trusted, and Muslims who had converted to Christianity, the Moriscos. And Pope Lucius III sent bishops to southern France to search out heretics in 1184. And this continued into the 14th century. So this concerned that the Jews, yes, had converted to Christianity, but they weren't really that bothered. They were practicing their old religion behind closed doors, and the same with the Muslims. And then Pope Gregory passed the job to Dominican and Franciscan orders in 1231. He was quite an interesting person, Pope Gregory the Ninth, because he was the guy who attempted felinicide, basically wiping out cats in Europe. And this, you know, from 1233, when he issued a public decree denouncing the black cat as demonic and diabolical. This carried on well into the Middle Ages. And cats were nearly wiped out. They were nearly made extinct. They were burned in baskets. There was a very famous case of a French midwife called Louisa Babet, who was burned in a cage with cats. So not only did she have to suffer the pain of the fire and the roasting in a cage from the flames, but being ripped apart by cats who were being burned with her. So yeah, that's very interesting, you know, to think that yes, we nearly didn't have any cats in this country. Also, the Monty Python joke, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, is very wrong, because you were given 40 days notice when you were going to be investigated. And inquisitors would arrive in the town and give the citizens a chance to admit to the crimes of heresy. But yes, in saying that, you were given 40 days. You weren't told who would accuse you. You were given no counsel, no help whatsoever. So, you know, you were just faced with this inquiry into you. If you confessed, you were flogged. If you didn't, obviously you were tortured and executed. Confess then. You know, the modern interpretation to that, why didn't they just confess? Because of the name. At the time, your name was so very, very important, and meant life or death, really, if you had a good name or a bad name. So people would not confess, especially those who didn't see themselves as heretics, because obviously their name would be damned and their children wouldn't be able to get jobs, you know, they had to flee the village, etc., all this sort of thing. And obviously part of the whole thing was you had to accuse other people. I think he's a heretic, and I think she's a heretic, etc. And obviously often victims were you know, falsely accused, and many innocent people were executed. I've read a variety of different numbers on how many people were actually burned in the Spanish Inquisition. I don't think anybody really knows the exact number, but it's a lot. It's a lot. In the late 15th century, King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella of Spain believed that the corruption in the Spanish Catholic Church was caused by Jews who, in order to survive centuries of anti-Semitism, had converted to Christianity, but had no true conviction in their new religion. And they feared that even trusted conversos were practicing their old religion in secret. And basically this, you know, people were demanding tougher punishment for guilty conversos at that time. It was also a time when the king was planning a crusade to Granada to fight the Muslims, and he needed funding for that crusade. So it was quite handy, really, in his mind, you know, gain funding for the impending crusade by seizing the wealth of the heretic conversos who were going to be executed. So there was profit in there as well. Sorry about that. In 1478, Thomas de Torquemada, who was a Castilian Dominican friar, ironically from a family of conversos, encouraged the monarchs to create the Tribunal of Castile in order to investigate heresy among the conversos. And basically by 1480, the Inquisition was formed, and Jews were segregated into ghettos, and the Inquisition expanded to Seville, and a mass exodus of conversos followed, and I don't blame them. You know, people getting out of there as soon as they could. Obviously, as I've said, you had to accuse other people of heresy when you were investigated, and thus began hundreds of conversos being burned at the stake. If this went from one place to 8, like really quick, bang, you know, there's all that is happening all over all of a sudden. And Thomas de Torquemada introduced the auto de fe, which was an act of public penance. Okay, so you're accused of heresy, you're investigated, you're found guilty, you are given a San Benito. You have to wear what they called a San Benito. There were 3 different types. This was a yellow sackcloth tunic. And if you weren't going to be killed but you'd got to do penance, which obviously was torture, you wore a yellow sackcloth tunic with a big red cross on it. The Fuego Revolto was a yellow sackcloth tunic painted with flames pointing downwards, and that was when you were going to be strangled before you were burned, which was considered an act of mercy. And people who were condemned to die burned alive and awake wore the Samara tunic, which was yellow or black and had pictures of flames, dragons, devils sewn on it, and an image of the accused in the fire. And you had to wear this and a pointed hat that matched, carry a green candle, and walk to your place of penance or execution. And obviously everybody in town will be there watching you, and this was the auto de fe. This descended into madness basically over the amount of auto de fes that there were. What started off as people sort of watching an execution ended up with market stalls, people selling things, selling bread, trinkets, walking around, you know, screaming at the accused, throwing vegetables at them. A carnivalesque atmosphere, really. Quite crazy. So in 1484, Pope Innocent VIII believed that witchcraft should be seen as a crime of heresy, and this is it. This is where it kicks off. And Henrik Kramer, of course, published the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, in 1486, which endorsed the extermination of witches. One of the most misogynistic texts ever written. I think there was 33 pages devoted to men, but their crimes, you know, shooting an arrow at the cross, wasn't quite on par with the murdering female witch. Despite a distinction between white and black magic users were also in the firing line. As we've said, the church believed that you could only do any white magic because you'd made a pact with the devil. And obviously this is the point where we start to think about gendercide, really, because a lot of these tortures that were done were specifically female. When one had made a pact with the devil, the belief was that you fed your familiar from another teat, a third nipple, and often these were hidden on the body in places where you can't see them. And so obviously internal examinations of ladies would take place looking for this teat. And obviously these, you know, these were horrible female designed tortures. Also, we've mentioned cats. We'll mention the Juden hut, which was a very fashionable hat worn by Jewish young men at the time. It was a pointed hat with a small brim, and this became associated with heresy. This was the heretic's hat, and thence, you know, sort of associated with witches, and hence the pointed hat of a witch. Obviously, relating this now into the witch trials, in 1611, King James had the Bible retranslated, and there's obviously the King James Bible. And King James was frightened of witches. He'd written the book Demonology. The gunpowder plot had taken place in his reign, and some of the people in that plotting group were from Lancashire, and Lancashire became seen as a sort of bed of deviance and you know, criminals, and he'd come down very hard on the Pendle witches. And his translator knew this, so when faced with the word Mesafasa, which was a Hebrew word, you know, obviously nobody can translate it, nobody here from that time who can translate it, he just put witch in. Jewish linguistic scholars are still debating on what that word actually means, and some believe it meant poisoner. So that the phrase should have really been, "Thou shalt not suffer a poisoner to live." But obviously it was just an easy bang witch in there, because King James doesn't like them. So "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," and obviously this kind of backed up everything that was going on in the witch trials. The Bible was sort of pro-witch trials, etc. So we've got a table of statistics here, and looking at that, it's easy to see, you know, that this was obviously, you know, Hungary 1,482 women, 160 men. Yeah, predominantly women. There are anomalies. Iceland, for example, 110 men, 10 women. This could have been because of Viking connections. In Iceland, you know, men sort of seem more pagan, stronger connections to paganism, witchery through their ancestry. Normandy is quite interesting because it was more men in Normandy, and it was the shepherd who was the target, the focus point. A bit like the crone, the old sort of woman, old ugly woman, definitely a witch. It was the shepherd in Normandy. And these people were accused of witchcraft in their own right as men, definitely. When we look at, sort of open up this and look at the men who were accused across the spectrum, you'll find a lot of political sort of reasons for witchcraft accusations as well, as in the case of Urban Grandier, the priest of Loudun, who was he was pro keeping the walls of Loudun up. The crown wanted to centralise power and take the walls of Loudun down, but Grandier fought to keep them up. Cardinal Richelieu, who was for the wall coming down, he'd actually fallen out with Grandier when Grandier wrote a complaint about celibacy in the Catholic Church, and also quite a scathing satirical knock at Richelieu. So when an accusation of witchcraft towards Grandier came up, instead of quashing it like it would have been, because he was a member of the clergy, Richelieu was sort of like, yeah, okay, let's go with that, as a way to get rid of him. And he was accused by Sister Jeanne of the Angels from an Ursuline convent, can't even say it now, convent in the area. He was supposed to have sent a demon to have sex with her. And obviously she, you know, this is what she said, and Richelieu was sort of like, okay, let's you know, keep that going. And it created what they called the Loudun possessions, where nuns were sort of stripping naked, barking like dogs, cavorting in front of people, and it was all said to be Grandier who'd done this. And he was basically tortured with the Spanish boot, which was a metal sleeve full of spikes, tightened onto the leg to crush the bones and break the bones, and it worked so effectively that bone marrow was trickling out of his legs. He was supposed to be strangled before he was burned, but that didn't happen. And they also stopped him from saying his last words by spitting water in his face. And he was burned alive and completely innocent. So yes, men certainly had their fair share of terror in the witch trials, but often it was political. Somebody didn't like them, these kind of things. And then obviously in Iceland it was to do with Viking ancestry, etc. So everywhere else, why women? Why women? Why was it, you know, it's sort of 90% here, 76 in Hungary, 90% Switzerland, 95 in parts of France, etc. Why? So to answer that question, we'll sort of go back again to Jewish mythology, kind of pre that really, an ancient Mesopotamian wind demon called Lilith, who in the alphabet of Ben Sirah was Adam's first wife. And in this version of events, they were allowed to have sex, Adam and Lilith. But Lilith did not want to lay beneath Adam, and Adam didn't think that God would like it, basically. And Lilith reminded him that she had been made from the same clay as he had. Obviously, Adam sort of, in some respects, was a golem, you know, a clay man, a mud man, who became human when God breathed life into him. And when Adam became lonely, he went back to the spot where he'd made him from and made Lilith. It was the slime that was left, granted. Sorry about that again. It was the slime that was left, yes, but it was still the same mud, and so they were equal. And he didn't like that. You know, when she reminded him that she was equal to him, he's like, no, God won't like that, don't like that. And so she sprouted wings, said the name of God, sprouted wings, and flew to the Red Sea, where she had many liaisons with demons and many children. And basically Adam complained to God. God sent 3 angels to bring her back. She wouldn't come back, so God started to kill her children. Right, that's it. I am now turning my phone So they struck a bargain, her and God. You know, she said, because she started killing human children back for revenge, and it went on. And God said, okay, I won't kill your children anymore if you don't kill human children who are wearing this amulet. And she said, okay, and that was it. He left her alone. He put Adam to sleep and removed a rib from Adam and made Eve. But apparently this rib was crooked. So Eve could never be spiritually straight. Ergo, tempted by the snake, and showed that weakness. So you've got two very iconic women there, sort of associated with the Bible story. One, Lilith, who's too independent, and Eve, who's easily tempted. And this is sort of reflecting on how people saw a woman's character. Also, from ancient Egypt and into Paracelsus's, the alchemist's time, women were seen by scholars, intellectuals of the era, to have a floating womb. This womb wasn't seen to be tethered inside the human body, but floating, an unstable organ, and therefore women were unstable creatures. Also, there's lots of wonderful medieval drawings of women collecting penises and making penis trees. This notion that women stole your penis, impotence, you know, ability to use your penis, was blamed on witchcraft. And the Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of Witches, described how women were chiefly addicted to evil superstitions, and went on to blame the greed of a woman, the credulous nature, her feeble mind and body, her slippery tongue, her jealous nature, and her inherently evil disposition, and her tendency to give in to the devil's influence. And obviously this is something that carried on into the Puritan view, the weak woman easily affected by the devil, into Salem, etc. There's one of the wonderful medieval drawings of a woman with her little penis tree. So, of course, yes, men were burned and hung, more in some places than others. Women certainly more across the board. Some people say it's because women can do magic better than men, they're connected to the moon, the goddess, etc. Other people sort of go with, you know, this idea of gendercide. But we must remember that women accuse women too, and this could have been jealousy, it could have been fear. I better accuse somebody other, they'll accuse me, etc. But it was definitely this notion that, from the old division between black and white magic, that men can control the high magic. The thaumaturge, you know, the miracle worker, is a man, and the woman, the unstable creature, uses the dark magic. And this stereotype, of course, is put forward in Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth, with the three witches, you know, around the cauldron, when shall we three meet again, creating havoc for the kingdom. Whereas you've got somebody like Faust, in Marlowe's Faust, the scholar, you know, who makes a pact with the devil for knowledge. So sort of the idea that a pope, I mean, popes were supposed to make pacts with the, you know, the devil, to be able to conjure demons to do their will and stuff. But these are religious men that can control the magic, the man, the control, whereas the woman, she's plotting death and destruction, almost like the magic sends her mad in some way. And this is all sort of attached to very much the old ugly woman. When you think of Matthew Hopkins, and one of his victims was an 80-year-old woman, you know, he sort of stripped her in front of people. It was hideous torture, and then took her land, you know, got £1 for every witch, etc. And they were the targets. Women living alone, they've got land, let's get them out, get the land. Women living with cats, you know, oh no, she's a witch. The sexy witch, this stereotype of the sexy witch, is often quite harmless. When you think of Circe and Odysseus, yes, she might turn you into a pig, but then she'll turn you back and sleep with you. It's still that element of control. A man can control her, but he can't control the old ugly crone. And that she's immediately guilty. Women curse because they can't fight. This is another one that's been put forward. Some scholars think, no, it's all mental illness, everybody was crazy, you know, nobody can do witchcraft, it's nuts. You know, there was no herbalist, there was no this, there was no that, everybody was just insane. and it was just scapegoats looking for scapegoats. Certainly back in the day they weren't doing witchcraft as we see it now. As I've said, not Wiccan. Wiccan is Cheryl Gardner, 1950. No women in robes performing rituals. Something as simple as a nettle being relieved by a nettle sting being relieved by a dock leaf would have been seen to be witchcraft. Then this notion of hysteria, you know, the womb, woman, hysteria, hysterical. Of course, a woman's unstable and is going to do crazy magic. It's only very recently, again, that word has been applied to men. Men can be hysterical too, so now the word has kind of dropped out of use. So why is this relevant in the 21st century? It's relevant because it's still happening. Witch camps in Africa, India. Very recently, a lady was boiled alive in China to boil the demons out of her, and she killed her, of course. Children who were abandoned as witches, you know, the family believe that they've caused them misery and leave them, little boy, you know, left to die in the streets, called a witch. This is happening now. Obviously, in the Western world, we can look at control, male control. Remember Hillary Clinton on a broomstick, pictures of her, you know, any power woman sort of brought down by the image of a witch, harried and hag. These become insults equivalent to whore, in a way. And it somehow makes a woman seem inferior, lesser, crooked in some way, to be ruled with an iron fist because they're evil in some way, wrong, and will, you know, obviously upset the apple cart because they're unstable and can't be trusted. And it's almost this feeling of step out of line and the fire is relit. And a good example of this is the abortion law in Texas. And this is coming quite recently. And no abortion after 6 weeks, even in cases of rape. You can report a woman like a criminal who wants an abortion after that time. And the man who was talking about this referred to a woman as a host body. And if that's not an example of patriarchal control, I don't know what is. And obviously, the notion of with the witch trials and gendercide, yes, patriarchy, the patriarchal church. There's been theories put forward that the male doctors coming up wanted the midwives out of the way so they could take their work. Anybody who went against the church, who sort of stood against the church, especially female. And these are these notions of patriarchal control. And even in some instances, when a man, as in Grandier, was burned, that was still patriarchal control, because it was, the rivaling of men. One man didn't like another, etc. So yes, that is the general sort of idea of the witch trials and gendercide. Some people blame the Little Ice Age, the very cold weather in Germany. Some people blame economic crisis, and some people just, think people were looking for scapegoats, but ultimately it was certainly more women than men. So I hope that you enjoyed that, and it's given you something to think about. Go away and research it. It's something really interesting to look into. See what you think. Do you think this was a way of culling women? Do you think it was just the way it turned out? To do with the distinction between black and white magic and divine magic being used by men. I mean, that's something that kind of came through into esoterica. The Order of the Golden Dawn and things like that kept women out at one point. Very male-dominated high magic, and yet witchcraft is associated with women. So yeah, is it that? Is it, is witchcraft a lesser form of magic done by women who are seen as lesser creatures? What do you think happened? I'd be interested to know and to see some comments. That would be great. So I've been Elisa Gray, and I hope to give you a talk again in the future. Thank you very much for listening.